And welcome back to Central Valley Talk COVID edition. This is a special authors edition of Central Valley Talk. And by the way, what are you doing? You have COVID. Are you staying home? Are you being careful? Here's what I'm doing. Morning, noon, and night. I read reading books. And I don't do it just because of COVID. I do that all year round. I read every single day. I read books, sometimes 2 or 3 books. I'm constantly reading multiple books at a time. By the way, if you want to follow along what I'm reading, go out to this special website called Goodreads, goodreads.com, and you can keep up with what I'm reading. Right now I'm reading a book, The Lincoln Conspiracy by Brad Metzler. And it's not the conspiracy where Lincoln got shot. It was a different conspiracy. Fascinating. Also, I'm reading a book called Tillie Lewis, The Tomato Queen, by the author Kyle Elizabeth Wood. And stick around, because in a little while on the program, we're going to have Kyle Elizabeth Wood on the show. Have you ever, if you read like I do, have you ever wanted to meet the authors of the books you're reading? I do that. I go and find the authors and meet them. I met Frank McCourt, author of Angela's Ashes. Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian. I got to meet her. She worked for Lyndon Johnson, and she wrote a lot of books about that period. And she's still writing. She's still out there writing. I met Ron Chernow, who wrote Grant. And I met him at Grant's tomb in New York last year. So I like to stalk these authors. And I'm right now stalking Kyle Elizabeth Wood. She'll be on in just a few minutes. She wrote, as I just said, Tillie Lewis, A Tomato Queen. Now, I do want to mention that we have a show dedicated to arts and authors. It's on every Thursday at 11 a.m., and it's hosted by Carol Love Forbes, herself an artist and an author. So tune in on Central Valley Talk Thursday at 11 a.m. for our show dedicated to the arts and authors. Now, the book I'm reading, I mentioned, we're going to meet the author in a minute, the Tillie Lewis, A Tomato Queen. First of all, I grow tomatoes. Everybody in the Central Valley grows tomatoes or tries to grow tomatoes. And this is a book it's a true California story. Tillie Lewis pioneered tomato growing in the Central Valley. And she has the first and probably the largest at the time tomato canning operation. Maybe not the first, but certainly the largest. Now, you ever have one of those days where you work and work and work on your computer and you go to print out what you did and it wouldn't print? Well, moments before we came on the air, my computer wouldn't print my notes. So I'm looking at my phone. I have my notes on my phone here, so follow along if you can. Now, Tillie Lewis, A Tomato Queen, is a true California story. And it's a good complement to books like Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. Irving Stone's Men to Match My Mountains gave us a good look at the 19th century in California. But this book gives us a great peek at early 20th century. I think all high school kids, especially a part of the curriculum is Grapes of Wrath, all high school kids, because there is a California history component in high schools, they should read Tillie Lewis, A Tomato Queen, because it gives us a really, really good look at early 20th century California. Now, Tillie Lewis, I don't want to give too much away yet because we're going to talk to the author in a minute. She's a young Jewish girl from Brooklyn, New York, and somehow she ends up in California as a tomato grower, the largest tomato packing company around, and pioneering a tomato variety. We're going to find out the backstory to that. Now, I grew up in California. I was born in California in the 1950s, believe it or not. And when I was a kid growing up, my parents, all their friends, everybody we came into contact with were from somewhere else besides California. So when we grew up, we heard stories of the Depression and of World War II. They weren't California-based stories. They were stories from Missouri or Arizona or the Midwest. But Tillie Lewis was in California during the Great Depression and during World War II. So it gives you a great California perspective on things. We are going to, the book it's fascinating because it tells you how she found Stockton, how she researched and found the best place in the country to grow tomatoes. The story goes through the Depression, how Tillie Lewis worked so hard to keep so many Californians in jobs, hundreds and hundreds of Californians in jobs through the Depression. And then World War II hits. Guess what? Her workforce goes off to the war. And a lot of her workforce, or a portion of them, were Japanese. And California, the United States, took all the Japanese citizens and put them in intern camps. So the workforce is depleted for Tillie Lewis, and it's fascinating how she gets through that. One of the things she did, and interesting in the story, is she went to this little college called College of the Pacific in Stockton. Sounds a lot like University of the Pacific. I'm sure that it morphed into that at some point. She went and she recruited the college professors' wives to work in her cannery. She needed the workers. Fascinatingly, we're going to talk to the author about this. Tillie Lewis, the tomato queen, hung out with people like Fanny Bryce, Eddie Cantor, Sophie Tucker, Lucille Ball, and I just saw a picture a minute ago of her and I think Jimmy Durante. We're going to find out how that comes about. Anyway, let's bring the author. Welcome, Kyle Elizabeth Wood, author of Tillie Lewis, the Tomato Queen. And I got the book. I couldn't get it here in time, so I bought it on Kindle. So this is the first Kindle book I ever read, and I'm reading it on my iPhone. So all that is new to me, but welcome. Let's say welcome first. You can hear us okay, and you're in Monterey, California, right?
I am indeed.
Yeah. So I just wanted to start with this question, and jump in anytime, because I talk a lot, as you can see. This little girl, she was a little teenage girl in Brooklyn, and her family was Jewish and pretty orthodox, observant, we might say, Jews in New York. And at some point in her teen years, I believe, she crosses a bridge from Brooklyn to Manhattan to get her first real job. Tell us about that.
Well, Tillie's first real job, Tillie fibbed a little bit. In those days, now we're talking about, Tillie was born in 1896. I think that's important to start there. So she was born quite a few years before women got the vote. So at that point in time, we didn't know if women were going to obtain the vote. So Tillie sort of voted from the beginning of her life to obtain her own independence. And her family was extremely Orthodox Jewish, and they lived in the tenements at Brooklyn. Her sister became a housewife, and she was fabulous at it, and that's what she wanted to do. But Tillie looked at that, and she was the little sister, and she said, no, this is not for me. I do not want to be a standard Jewish wife and mother, or that kind of thing at all. She had looked at, because she was in New York. New York was, in fact, the center of the universe at that point in time. And with all of the travel opportunities, inexpensively so, with the ferries and the trains and you name it, she could easily move back and forth across from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and there was wealth everywhere on the other side. Now, Tillie observed that and thought, that is what I want. But how do you get that when you're a 14, 15-year-old, very pretty Jewish girl, but very smart? That was her.
I say that she was smart too from the beginning.
Really smart. So she decides that she's going to go ahead and, this was her first fib about her age. Fibbing about her age was something she did throughout her lifetime. God bless her. I do that too. And she gets on the boat and goes across, and she goes to the Ziegfeld Follies. Now, for those of you that don't know what the Ziegfeld Follies was pretty much Hollywood, New York style. There was no real Hollywood. It was just, Hollywood had not started. The people from the Ziegfeld Follies will be Hollywood, if that makes sense to you. So she goes, and she gets a little part as what they refer to as clothes horse, because as cute as Tillie was, as pretty as she was, the women of the Follies were beautiful beyond belief. You really need to look that up. It's a whole nother level. So she was a cutie and not a beauty, but she accepted that. Tillie Lewis was a realist, and that is important for all of us to remember throughout the story of Tillie Lewis, and really throughout our own personal stories. Are you looking at what your real gifts are? And Tillie she realized, if I join the Ziegfeld Follies, I might find a wealthy husband. Because for women, and now we're talking 1911. She's 15 and it's 1911. Vote doesn't come until 1920, remember, and that's a maybe at that point in time. So she goes ahead and she's a little clothes horse, and she is enjoying this, for the first time ever, this mix of humanity, this mix of black and white and brown talent. And she's getting the idea that these people are amazing. There's no racism. What there is on the Folly stage is excellence.
Now she
sees it.
I'm just guessing, strict Jewish life, was she a little sheltered, and all of a sudden she steps into this thing where people are scantily clad on stage, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes. I have a photo of Tillie taken by white photography, who only did Broadway and Ziegfeld. That's all they did. And Tillie has a bobbed hairdo in 1911. That didn't come into vogue until the 20s, until 1920 with the flappers. But Tillie had her hair bobbed, gobs of makeup, a beautiful string of pearls, and her panties.
That was it. Okay.
That was it.
Now, I feel like, and I want to tell you how this happened. I want you to tell us how this happened. If she had not gone and joined the Ziegfeld Follies, it was a little bit of a racy thing to do at the time, especially for a young girl, she might not have ended up as a Tomato Queen. She would have been something great, I'm sure, but she might not have ended up as a Tomato Queen in, of all places, Stockton, California. How did it go from one place to another?
How it went from one place to another is what Tillie's purpose was, again, was to not be poor. That was really what she was after. She didn't want to be poor. She did not want to live that lifestyle. And she also still had these strong Jewish values, but she sure didn't go by her name. She changed her name because her father and her mother had passed away from tuberculosis early on, and her father was almost a rabbi, and he was not happy. So this was a real rift in the family. They pretty much sat Shiva for her due to the circumstances. So she looked at the other ladies of Ziegfeld, and they were pretty free with their charms, and that's something Tillie was not going to do. So she found one gentleman, Florindo Del Gaizo, and that was her guy. And he was much older than she was, but he was almost a prince in Italy. And he had a huge stock market business in Manhattan, and he was also of Del Gaizo Cannery in Naples, Italy, where they had the largest tomato and fruit canners of Europe at the time. So she catches the golden goose.
Yeah, and he was Catholic, and he's married, and Catholics marry for life, so he's not going to leave his wife and marry Tillie, and she knew and accepted that, right?
Yes, she wasn't happy about it, but she wanted the gold on her finger, but she was going to accept that, and she loved him, and he loved her back, but that's, I think that's a real minor part. It's a big part of how she got going, because she understood as a girlfriend, ladies, pay attention, I'm sorry if anybody gets mad at me for this, but as a girlfriend, certainly in 1911, 1915, during this period of time, she realized as a girlfriend she could be replaced at any time. So
now,
she paid.
Yeah, I want to read one quote while we're on that subject out of the book.
Okay.
You wrote, she was not a loose woman, but she had a flexible morality.
Yes, and that was from her nephew, who was her right-hand man. Because he was chastising me. He wanted me to make it clear, and that's what I'm doing right here. And he passed away. But to make it clear that she was not in any way, shape, or form a loose woman. But she, again, her goal was to not be poor. And this was kind of a Yiddish Scarlett O'Hara. She was not going to be hungry, and nor any of her kin. I mean, she was going to see to it that being hungry, which they were at that time, that wasn't going to happen to her or her family. And that was what she was about, is not being the richest woman in the world and not being a tart or any of that stuff, but just being able to find enough. Does that make sense? Enough. She wanted enough. But what ended up being is she went to Italy as the fluff with Florindo Del Gaizo, and she studied because she had the brains. She decided to make friends with the brother who was the president of Del Geyser Corporation, Luigi. She listened to every word the brother had to say about building a business, about excellence, about buying only the best products, only the best equipment, and hiring loyalty, and having loyalty. He told her that loyalty in your employees is better than gold because it turns into gold. She never forgot that.
Yeah, she treated her workers very, very well. According to the book, really helped me to understand that. She knew how to treat her workers.
Well, that is how I got the information in the first place. Imagine today if we loved our employers so much. Shrines were kept. That is how I got the information, and that is how I have literally into several museums the products and information and photographs from these individuals who worked for her, Spanish, blacks, Chinese, Japanese, you name it, German people that worked for her that kept individually literal shrines of Tillie Lewis. They loved her. She loved them. They loved her.
Right. Now, jumping forward a little, she studied. You said she really studied these experts who had been at it for generations and learned from them. And then she researched the country. She knew she wanted to do this in America. Found Stockton, California, which is just 2 hours from here in Fresno, or an hour and a half, I think, and figured out this is the place to grow tomatoes. And she built the plant. Becomes the biggest plant, I think, in the nation or the world. And then the war starts. And now her product's really, really in demand. They really need her product for the war effort. And now all of her workers left to go to the war.
Right.
And the Japanese...
and actually, she was the 5th largest cannery in America. But the largest canner of tomatoes.
Of tomatoes, right.
Yeah, of tomatoes in the country. And so where do you want me to begin? With the war or prior to
Yeah,
that?
about the wartime. Just how you started talking about how she treated her workers and how she was able to retain workers. And her workers, I think, were essential workers, so they didn't have to go to the war. Some wanted to out of patriotism, but at her highest demand, her workforce was depleted.
Right. Most of her workforce were patriotic, and that's part of the fact they were loyal. No matter what race they were loyal Americans. So the men didn't have to, and this was the term the greatest generation. These were those people. These men of an age that could serve our country after Pearl Harbor hit. You couldn't keep them home. They were going to go serve their country. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the Japanese were taken away. Now, Tillie had a special affinity prior to the war happening for the Japanese. She absolutely, for whatever reason, I think they're lovely people too, but Tillie really loved them. And she was working on she had an effort to have them have an independent place to live. But they liked staying on the boats out in the Delta, San Joaquin Delta. And so she was working through the government to have them rehabbed and have them be nice places to live. At which point, naturally, the government decided, unbeknownst to Tillie, that a war could possibly be that close and that imminent. They decided she was a spy, when all she was trying to do was do a nice thing. So they were investigating her for being a Japanese sympathizer, when again, all she was doing was trying to do the right thing by her people. In the meantime...
Interestingly, she was investigated multiple times for spying for several countries. Even J. Edgar Hoover himself was involved. Tell us a little bit about these escapades.
Well, it began in the beginning, in the 1930s, the idea that Florida Del Geyser was assisting her build this plant. And let's face it, we have lady role models now. We have lady role models we've just lost, God bless them. God bless her in particular. You all know who I mean. But there were none then. I mean, all you had were a couple of movie star flop, but you didn't have any female role models. Tillie was it. So Tillie was not only it, she was weird as far as other people were concerned. There had to be something wrong with her. There had to be something absolutely wrong with a Jewish beauty, and she dressed like a movie star. So she's got furs, she's got diamonds, and she's a divorcee from Brooklyn, New York, who's lost her accent. So she sounds more British than she does anything else. So she has all of these things that just sound suspect, doesn't it? Yeah. So the FBI saying, what is up with this woman? So somebody decides that she has a picture of Benito Mussolini in her office. You betcha. And somebody says, oh yeah, she makes us salute him every day. Well, it was a picture of Florindo de Gaizo,
who might have looked vaguely a little bit like Mussolini.
He was bald.
Yeah.
And it sounds, so that was it. So, but that ends up being forgotten, and she was arrested by the police. But the good news for the historian here, the good news for me, is the FBI kept a good eye on Mrs. Lewis. 4 years. This thick was her FBI file.
And you're able to access that as an author? What a great original source.
Well, anybody can access if there is that kind of information through the Homeland Security. You can just pay a fee and ask, and you can get a file if there happens to be one. Speaking of the Great Seraph, Steinbeck had this big. I mean, he had a massive, and they swore he did, but he certainly didn't. But anyway, so Tillie was investigated, so we know she was arrested multiple times. Not thrown in jail, arrested, but investigated, and FBI and all of this stuff. So by the time she gets to World War II has occurred, she has been investigated so thoroughly, J. Edgar Hoover himself finally says, you know what, guys? This woman is not only not guilty of anything, she is the the woman cans tomatoes, and she's as American as apple pie. Yeah. So he gives her, the pack contracts for K rations and C rations.
Yeah.
So she's got this going, and it's in Stockton. Stockton's not going to suffer, but she doesn't have the men workers. So it's not just the Japanese. She doesn't have the men. They've gone. And as you earlier stated, she went to COP, which was not the disease at the time. It was the College of Pacific that will become University of Pacific. It is, in fact, University of Pacific now, and has everybody who can possibly come and help put these things together. And they sang songs about working for Tillie. I mean, it's very, very funny how that happened. But Tillie needed workers, so she always thinking, like we were talking about her think walk with the steam boiler blowing out. Tillie decides, well, Facebook and all those other things that have the campuses, Tillie did it first. Yeah. Tillie bought buses and painted her title, Flotil Tillie Lewis, actually she wasn't Tillie Lewis at the time, but Flotil on buses, and she went and picked people up, workers. And if the workers had children, the children came along too. So on her campus, she had daycare. She had places for the older people to sleep and take a nap. And they were virtually there all the time, and she fed them.
Right. It's like she could identify an obstacle and figure out how to get around it. Workers can't get to work, we'll go pick them up. Workers, their husband's off at war and they have kids at home, we'll do daycare. It's just any obstacle she had. And the one you just alluded to, I wanted to talk about that. One thing you have to do in canning tomatoes, you have to somehow use boilers. I don't know what they do. But her boiler went out, and tomatoes, and it's going to be days before she get it fixed. You can't just leave the tomatoes on the shelf and they'll wait for you. They would go bad. She would lose her whole crop. So her boiler went out. What did she do? Tell us that story. It's fantastic.
Okay. It's 1936. It's her second pack. And she's hoping it to be better than the first, naturally. And she gets a hysterical call that they were actually these beautiful copper pots. So if you look in my material and online, you'll see these just gorgeous. There were 7 copper kettles that did the cooking of the tomatoes to turn them into paste. Okay, and the boiler unit went out. It's gone. It's done. It's dead. Now, Mike, go ahead and tell people how hot it gets in the Central Valley in the summer during peak 110, 115. Those tomatoes are going to last hours, not days.
Right.
I mean, she is in trouble. So, in her dress, her stockings, and her high-heeled pumps, she took a think walk. And that's what she did. By herself, she took a think walk, and she walked past the railroad tracks and the spurs that led up to her company and her spot. And she's thinking, and she looked at the spur that came right up, and she's looking at the train engine, and she thought, doesn't that run on steam? So she went back and she asked some of her gentlemen, her supervisors, because she didn't know. She said, those run on steam, and the kettles run on steam. And they said, yes. So it's called the shunt. She didn't know. She knew then. And I know now. And now so do you. She called the trains, and what was the Standard Pacific, whatever.
Yeah, called the railroad.
Yeah, called the railroad, because I don't have the book with me right now, and I wrote it, I wrote it down so I didn't have to remember it. But she calls the railroad, and she says, how much would it cost and would it work? And they went, Mrs. Weisberg, her name was Weisberg at the time, that would absolutely work. It's called shunting, and we'll just bring the two engines up, unless you want 3. And she said, how much will that cost? And they said, like $15. She said, I'll take 3.
Yeah.
So sure enough, they brought the train engines, and she was famous with the men. And this was a trick. Here, imagine, she is a woman. Men, in a time where they don't listen to their wives, they might listen to their moms, but they're not listening to their wives. They don't have women they work for at this time in the 1930s. They don't. This was Tillie's first point of being absolutely respected and honored by gentlemen in industry in general. Now, mind you, women weren't in this kind. They did makeup, they did cookies, they did clothing, they did hats. They did not do industry. So here's this woman in industry, and she saves the day and gives them a darn good idea about how to save their products.
Not just save the day. She could have lost her whole season, her whole year.
Absolutely.
And she comes up with this great idea, brilliant idea. Anyway, this book just goes. Oh, here's one reason why I didn't finish the book. It's because I love a book with notes, footnotes, in notes. Every chapter, there's notes, and at the end of every chapter, there's notes. So it always takes me on this other research I have to do. And one of them was, you gave the address of her house in Stockton, the 7,000-foot mansion she bought. So I had to go look it up and find it and stuff like that. It's still there. So I love the notes in your book, and it takes me on all these side studies of history and things going on. And, this is our neighborhood. Stockton's our neighborhood, and that's what made it so fascinating. I want to give you a chance to square up. We're almost out of time. But first I want to say, I went to Amazon and bought this book on Kindle, $6 or $7, very affordable. I'm thinking of getting a box of them and handing them out for Christmas. I have to give Christmas presents to my dad, my brother, my cousins and stuff. So they're all going to get the Tomato Queen book for Christmas. So I just want to plant that idea with some other people too. Get Tomato Queen, give it out for Christmas. But I think by having the Kindle, I'm missing some photos and graphics and stuff. You said something about a website. Where can we find that?
It's KyleElizabethWood.com.
Okay.
So, but there's that, and then there's also, I sent you other links to the Smithsonian, because, gosh, oh golly gee, the Smithsonian Institute is right now having this be the year of the woman. And yes, it's a difficult year, but the ladies can handle it. And at the Smithsonian, the Tillie Lewis exhibit called the only one in the room, because when Tillie Lewis was present, she was the only one in the room. And the exhibit celebrates another 6 women of various abilities and ethnicities. So it's a wonderful thing to look up too. So Tillie's part of that. I'm very proud that this book helped Tillie to get there. And it was through the fact that, again, and Tillie would stress this, it wasn't just her. It was those wonderful employees, the people that took care of her baby, and that was Flotil Tillie Lewis Foods. She would always, always give them credit because they deserved it. It isn't one great mind. It's a great mind with others helping.
And by the way,
she understood that.
In the Kindle edition, there is a picture of the car. I'm just now seeing a full color picture of her. Was it a Chrysler?
Yes.
That big,
and
big, old, beautiful car.
She bought it at Mr. Chrysler's funeral.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's only 6 of those made, I think.
Yes.
And she got the green one instead of the red one because, do you remember who had the red one? Some big movie star got the red one. I forget now. So, I just read the book, so I have all these facts here. You wrote it a few years ago, so you can't remember everything. Anyway, go to KyleElizabethWood.com for more information. Can they buy the book on the website?
No. They can buy it at Amazon.com.
Okay. Amazon.
And I gave you the link. So if you put the link within this.
Yeah, we're putting up a bunch of links up there. I'm going to go to the website. I'm going to go to the Smithsonian website. If I can get there, I'm going to go to the Smithsonian. It's a little hard to travel right now. Anyway, I love the book. I'm going to finish reading it. And it is truly a great picture, like I said, of California through the Great Depression, through World War II and beyond, which, like I said, we don't get a lot of exposure to that because all of our people are from somewhere besides California. So
right.
It's very cool to see that. Sorry we're out of time. We'll have you back. We're going to spend some more time on this when I finish the book. But
because we got to talk about the Pineapple Pirate.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about that now. Yeah.
Okay.
We're going
Pineapple
overtime,
Pirate.
everybody. Don't change the channel.
After World War II, everybody remembers, well, Hawaii had a few problems. So it's kind of the pineapple issue is kind of a problem. Well, in the can industry, you cannot have fruit cocktail without pineapple tidbits. You must have pineapple tidbits in there an X amount. So Tillie couldn't find any. So she went to Mexico and she negotiated a deal with a gentleman that turned out to be a big fat fibber. So she bought a couple of Army ships that were out of commission, and she named them all like she named everything the Miss Tillie. So she's got the Miss Tillie down in Mexico, and she's discovering through her people, Harry Rosen in particular, who is calling and saying, oh my goodness, this is as illegal as it gets. We are about to be arrested by the Mexican police any second. So there, Tillie says, we'll fix it. We will go into international waters in the boat and make it the can plant. So they had the little boats coming in with the Mexican workers and bringing pineapples in onto the ship, and they ended up having the Mexican police come on with rifles and guns, and it was just quite the mess. But they did it. Tillie, the bottom line, the important takeaway is no matter what's going on, Tillie Lewis figured out a way to get around it. And the woman even had the Spanish flu in 1919 and didn't die from it. So that's another story that's within this. So she was affected by all the things we're affected by now. Tillie Lewis was affected by then and made a mint not only for herself, but for the people that she touched. So anyway, Pineapple Pirates, they ended up actually being arrested for piracy, not Tillie because she was too smart to come down, but her husband-to-be and Mr. Rosen were indeed arrested for piracy.
Piracy.
For piracy.
Yeah.
But what they did is got Tillie's permission to buy all the booze up in that particular city And they just had a big party until Tillie saved and got the attorneys down. They had the best time. So the story's really fun about how the pineapple pirate thing kind of goes down. And I think you'll enjoy that.
There's so many great stories in this book, just like that. I want to conclude by saying I feel that because Tillie went and joined the Ziegfeld Follies at whatever 14, 15, however old she was, because of that she met her Italian lover, who led her on the path to canning and the tomato industry, and had that little thing not happened, she probably would have gone on to some greatness, but because she's in the Ziegfeld Follies, that kind of helped her. And I just want to I know we're over time, but she's hanging out throughout her life with Fanny Bryce, Lucille Ball, etc. Just tell us a quick story about that.
Okay, she understood, again, from Luigi Del Gaiso, the brother, to always keep these friendships as gold. Nothing in your life. Look around you. Call somebody today that's a friend of yours. Your friends are gold. Your family is gold. So she retained all these nobodies from the Ziegfeld Follies, from the Groucho Marx. Who was he going to be? Who knows? Eddie Cantor, Fanny Bryce. They might have been nobodies, but they ended up being friends of hers, number one, and quite the somebodies. So when she ended up, Americans got fat after World War II. She creates the Tasty Diet, and there's a whole thing with that. So to promote Tasty Diet, she brings in her Hollywood friends to be taste testers. From Rocky Marciano, the heavyweight fighter that you might not know today, but he was the heavyweight fighter. Groucho Marx, the Marx Brothers, Jimmy Durante, everybody. And then her estate in Palm Springs, well, Sinatra was her neighbor, Cary Grant. Cary wasn't invited places too much because he would not keep his clothes on. He answered the door naked. So he was not appropriate. Shame on you, Cary. But she had this exciting life no matter where she went. But business was her business. Business was her business. And she was the first female industrialist in America. And God, you should celebrate that and know that she's the most important woman you have never heard of until today.
Well, I want to tell our viewers, I mean, this is fun here, listen to us talk about this. There's something more fun than hearing Mike Briggs and Kyle Elizabeth Wood talk about Tillie Lewis, and that's reading the book yourself, because we're just barely touched on all the great stories that are in the book, and they're all true. This is California history, which makes it even more fascinating. You couldn't make up a story like this. Nobody would believe it. So go to the Amazon, type Tillie Lewis, and it'll pop right up. Buy the book. Kyle, I can't wait to have you back in a few weeks or a month or so. We'll talk more about this. Thank you for giving us all this extra time.
You're to cry at the end.
Oh, am I? Don't tell me. Don't tell me. I haven't got to the end of the book yet. All right. We'll be back with more Central Valley Talk right after this.